What do you got for me today, Timmy?
Well, let's tell people about our podcast, John.
All right. What's the title of that podcast again? I'm bald.
I'm blind, and we're
Still buddies.
Yep.
We're buddies.
Awesome.
We've been friends for 30 years.
30 years.
What do you have for me today, Timmy C? Happy Sunday to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm back in Wisconsin after a nice trip out east to Washington D.C. And so
You were checking out schools, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
What was the feedback, the general feedback? Well, let's focus on the school first, and then I want to hear about your experience with DC, because you, being the cynic that you are, I'm sure you have some strong opinions about Washington DC generally.
I do.
But how was the school?
It was good. So George Washington, we went checked that out, and Marquette University has they call it the Les Aspin Center, where students can stay there for a semester in Washington if they're interested. And so we checked both of those out, and so Peter's interested in those.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So he could do the best of both worlds if he wants to do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Now, did you check out anything else? So let's talk about DC writ large. Before I forget, though, you had a birthday this week, right? I won't embarrass you by actually saying the actual date, but happy birthday to you, and I won't sing.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. My parents still, I'm going to be 50 this year. My parents still call and sing happy birthday every single year.
Yeah, my folks call.
Do they say sing? No? Do they sing?
Not always. My dad's not a huge singer.
I couldn't see your dad's too Iowa reserved for that, I would imagine. Yeah. I just love that he always called himself Timmy's old man.
Timmy's old man.
So,
yeah.
Timmy's old man.
I don't know if I'm going to have to switch to that for Peter. Peter's old man.
Well, I started calling my dad Pop years ago, and I don't know why. It just happened one time, and it's been, probably 40 years now I've been calling him Pops. So, yeah. But to give me some reflections on DC, I love DC as a city. I think it's very, very cool. And in fact, topical to that, the Phillies were playing the Washington Nationals yesterday, and they have their alternative city uniforms. And I think it's the grid layout of the city as the background. It's kind of cool. There's these lines across that go up and down, and it looks like the grid layout of DC generally. So
yeah, that's cool.
But tell me your thoughts.
So we're driving through, and I check, and I say,
not you, I hope.
Well, no, not this time. Not this time. And that's for another podcast. That's for the subscribers only podcast.
Timmy driving. We're gonna pull the scent of a woman.
Yeah. Well,
I gotcha.
Anyways, so we're driving through Pennsylvania, and I said, how far are we from Shanksville? And so we stopped by Shanksville, and that's where, if folks don't know, Flight 93 went down. And that was powerful. I listened to. Did you listen to the recordings people left on other people's answering machines?
It's tough for me because it's. I remember when I'm fascinated by the Kennedy assassination, and I called my dad on the 50-year anniversary of it, and he's still like, "Son, I can't talk about this." And I'm kind of that way about September 11th. And we went, obviously, as you know, last summer. And the recordings kill me, but I'm always reminded in a good way. I try to shine the positive light on it. The beginning of Love Actually, where he talks about all the people calling on September 11th, and all the calls were of love and hope and I'll see you soon and blah, blah, blah. And, basically saying the world's a good place. And that's kind of how I choose to remember it. But I did hear some of it, but I couldn't do too much, Tim. It's too tough for me.
Yeah, so. I couldn't do too much either. But what I was trying to explain this to my kids, right? Because when you're a parent, you have to do that. And what I was explaining is, we all give our lives for something, whether we admit it or not, right? Maybe it's an idea, maybe it's family, maybe it's spirituality, maybe it's just satisfying our vices or playing whack-a-mole or give ourselves to fear, right? But these ordinary people in a terribly short period of time had all those decisions compressed, right? And so what do? They reach out by phone and they tell people they love them. And then some of them chose essentially to make a sacrifice to protect the city I was going to visit next. So it put Washington in such a context. This is what, to die for people you don't even know. It just put it all in context for me.
Wow, you're starting heavy today, Timmy. Woo. Golly. Well, I was hoping to hear some of your cynical Timmy Cordises about, corrupt Washington and so forth. So how was the city, though? Did you like it? You've been, right? Or this is your first time?
I was there in high school. I liked it. It's really nice. You can't, you can't fault it. From an accessibility standpoint, everybody was nice. I loved the fact the Smithsonian had some models, so I could feel a model of the Wright brothers plane and learn that
that's cool.
Canards in the front. and not the standard tail arrangement, which I never knew. And so it was cool. But the other thing that really, John, that struck me is how young our country is.
Yeah, it is, right?
The oldest stuff, like 250 years old. Like that's a blip in the British Empire.
I know. And I remember Pat Morawski in college used to talk about, I don't know why I always remember this though, but empires. He's like, don't tell me that streets in America aren't Job Corps. He's like, we have to replace them every 5 years. They paved the roads once in Rome, thousands of years ago. He's like, they do it to keep people employed. And I was like, you know what? He might have a point.
I asked Dave about that, who was a civil engineer. And he's like, oh, they don't have the freeze thaw cycles. And I'm like, I don't know.
There is an element of me. And I always remember that about how young we are as a country. For some reason, that always reminds me of Pat Morawski. So, but no, it is cool. Did you see the White House? Did you drive by Congress? All that good stuff.
We got a tour of the Capitol. We walked around in the Supreme Court. We didn't catch oral arguments, but we got to sit in chambers and get a little lecture. We went to the.
Now, how do you do that? I didn't even know you could do that. I snuck in, as you know.
Well, you just walk in and they give lectures like every hour.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. That's not something that would appeal to my better half. In fact, I'm going to embarrass her, but she kind of dozed off during the oral arguments when we were there. I was literally like a kid on Christmas, like, oh my God, there's Antonin Scalia, 20 feet from me and so forth. And it's just not her cup of tea, as it were. So I don't think it's most people's, to be fair. So.
And we saw the National Archives where they have, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Just amazing. It was
unbelievable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then, though, John, we're leaving, and this puts it all in context. We're walking to through the parking garage.
Are you going to get depressing again?
No.
Okay.
And Peter's like, "Look, there's a Porsche. There's a Porsche." And it's like there's so much money flowing through that place that you can't help but say, this limited federal government that our founders conceived is something very different, and it feeds itself possibly at our expense, right?
Well, I think something like of the 10 or 20 most affluent counties in the United States, half of them are in the greater DC area. Yeah. It's not by coincidence. Yeah, it's amazing. And this kind of is germane to what we're talking about, which is there's so much money flowing in that you have to, I'm almost wondering if Congress people should be paid better. Because there's got to be conflicts of interest. Of course.
Oh my goodness. They just happen to all be millionaires or their spouses or partners. Like, come on.
No, I get it. I do. So, and this is the same thing. This is kind of how I espoused, and we're going to talk about college athletics today and the NIL and transfer portal. This is pretty much relevant to the NCAA tournament, but there's so much money flowing there, and we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar. I think it's estimates range from 25 to 35 trillion as the overall size of the GDP, depending on how it's computed and such. So we're not talking about chump change. And again, these Congress people make $200,000 a year. Okay, that's a very nice salary if you live in Wichita, Kansas. It may not be in the greater DC area though. So it's just, but yeah, you're right. That's absolutely true. There's just so much money, and it puts it in context.
Yeah.
Now, here's a good question though. Put you on the spot. Were you hopeful or were you dismayed upon leaving DC?
I was hopeful. I liked, seeing like all the languages, people visiting the monuments, having an interest. We were waiting in line to get into, I think it was, the archives, and some guys selling MAGA hats, and people aren't necessarily buying them, but everybody.
I wouldn't imagine in DC that those are flying off the shelves.
Yeah. But people are friendly, and it was neat.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. And you're saying it was a pretty accessible town for people.
Yeah,
with blindness and such. So that's cool. Yeah, and it's a very walkable city.
Yeah. We took
and by the way, it is hot in the summer. I mean, when you combine the fact that it's built on a swamp, so there's that natural moisture, and then you sort of add in the July heat. I was down there with Katie, and to this day, we will tell you the hottest day we've ever experienced in our entire life. We had gone to Arlington National Cemetery. Did you do that, by the way? See the changing of the guard and such? Yep. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
They do that 24 hours a day, come rain or shine.
So we were in the way of where the guard, and this guy taps us on the shoulder. It's like, guys, you gotta move. You got the guard. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be the guy who screws up the guard.
It's been going on for 150 years, and you're the guy who breaks the chain of command. Well, Timmy, let's get into college athletics, because we were, the NCAA tournament, and this is sort of the beginning of my the removal of my malaise, if you will, meaning I really struggle basically from about Christmas, there's the NFL playoffs and such, but my Giants have been so bad for a decade that really, I'm left to root against the Dallas Cowboys and the Eagles. And of course, the Eagles won the Super Bowl, so that adds to the malaise.
Right.
But March Madness to me, and then of course the Masters in 2 weeks, it's that idea that hope springs eternal. Plus, you combine it with opening day and such. So I love this time of the year. I'm watching the basketball tournament. There's a game going on right now, which after the podcast, I'll catch the end of. It's perfect. We'll be in the second half of Tennessee and Houston, the number 1 and number 2 seed. But one of the things I do want to point out about the NCAA tournament is of the Sweet 16, not a single team was outside of the Power 4 or Power 5 conferences, they now call them. I don't even know how many there are anymore. There used to be the Big 8, the Big 12, then there was the Pac-10, blah, blah. There's something like 4 or 5 power conferences now, the SEC, the Big 10, the ACC, and I forget the others. But the point being is that's indicative of the changing dynamics of athletics and this NIL, the name, image, and likeness, and the fact that students can now transfer. And I'll give some history of that if that's okay by you. Yeah. Okay. So the transfer portal really started as a consequence of COVID, which traditionally, if you were a college athlete and you transferred to another school, you could do so once in your college career. I think it was unlimited, but you had to sit out a year, meaning you were a freshman, you didn't get playing time at X, Y, and Z university. You wanted to go get some playing time. You weren't going to play again until you were a junior. So that made your decision sort of weigh on you. Well, with COVID, they opened up the passageway to allowing students to transfer. The problem is once that door, it's kind of like the Berlin Wall. Once you open it up, it ain't coming back, right? So it's kind of here to stay, so to speak. The other thing that's happened is in 2021, there was a major case at the at the Supreme Court called NCAA versus Alston, which basically, it was a unanimous decision. So conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats, whatever you want to call the judges, all agreed that there should be additional compensation that's made available to athletes. And so what that did is it opened the floodgates. It was intended for the idea that, student athletes could now get computers paid for and such, because I don't know if you remember this, but I remember freshman year distinctly. We're all in the same hallway. we're running to Target or something like that. And I said to Scott Sinja, remember he was our kicker?
Yeah.
I said, do you want me to grab you anything while we're there? Going to Target. And he said, yeah, can you get me a loaf of bread? But I need an individual receipt for that, because he had to submit it to the NCAA and get approval. But I said, no, I'm not doing that. He said, well, I can't get the bread then. Because can you imagine getting 60 items and then getting a separate one item, with a receipt? Yeah. And so basically what this case did was it said that's no longer acceptable. You can have additional compensation for athletes, but that inherently led to what they call the name, image, and likeness. So now students can garner money, and there are what they call NIL collectives on the universities. And they have a sort of a salary cap, if you will. This year it's $20 or $22 million that you're supposed to spend. Now that's across all athletics. But just to put it in perspective, Ohio State University by itself spent $250 million on intercollegiate athletics just last year alone. And so there's an article in the Washington Post that I'll call out later when we talk about this, from the president of St. Francis University here in Pennsylvania. And he said, look, we can't compete anymore, so they're going to go down a division. He said it's now big-time college athletics is big business. I'm going to say it's always been such. This is, at least to me, bringing it out in the open. What do you say, Tim?
Well, I think the universities, because we talked about Columbia last week, right? And I think we ought to ask ourselves, what is a university, right? Is it a bastion of free inquiry? Is it an agent of societal change? Is it networking site for the elite? Is it to deliver complicated skills? Is it to run a franchise of sports, right? Is it to provide grunt work for the pharmaceutical industry with cheap grad student labor? The university doesn't know what it is, other than it has a voracious appetite for money, and this satisfies it, right?
Fair. But could it not be all of those things at once?
I don't think so.
The only problem I've ever had is the sports, the idea basically, and this goes back to ancient Greece, where a whole person was somebody who was intellectual but was also athletic, and you engaged in physical activity as well as exercising your mind, as it were. And that's the idea behind it. I don't think anyone who thought of let's have a university be about the whole person was thinking about billion-dollar athletes, which is what we've created with the NCAA.
Well, tell me this, John. When's the last time you've heard of a high school kid with a cannon for an arm, or who weighs 300 pounds and can move, who's not college material?
Of course. But how
And
but
how
how is that any
statistically likely is that, John? That these folks, like my son had to apply to colleges and say, hey, can you get in based on your academics and your profile and blah, blah, blah. Right. How many of these folks actually are, college material?
Okay. But again, that goes back to your earlier point about what is the purpose of a college. I'm going to liken this to Catholicism. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
This should go well. I have a friend of mine who's a priest. He's actually my son's godfather. He married Katie and not that you'd know, because what was there, snow or something, and you couldn't fly out of Madison?
I couldn't fly out for like days.
Oh, get the hell out of here. I don't believe you. Anyway.
I camped out.
Yeah, you did.
Camped out at the airport. Went home with the gate agent.
Anyhow, he has said for years that if you want to read anything the Catholic Church is wrong about, read anything they've written about sex and love. Meaning, don't do this, do that, don't use birth control, have this, do blah. They're wrong completely. He said, if you want to read anything they're right about, read anything they've written about justice and social justice. Help the least among us, the poor, you have an obligation, and so forth and so on, right? Okay. My thing is to that end, this is how I look at college athletics. It's been happening for years where student athletes, quote unquote, which by the way was a term invented years ago specifically to avoid this discussion, which was how can these guys be compensated, because they didn't want them unionizing, right, for benefits and such. So they invented this term, student athletes. Okay. If you go to Duke to play basketball, you might be an athlete. The student part is questionable, to your point earlier. But what I'm getting at is it's always been such. And did you ever notice that most of the football players in Notre Dame when we were there all seemed to drive the same black Jeep Grand Cherokee? It was amazing how they all shopped at the same car dealership. What I'm getting at is it at least brings it out in the open now. It's been happening for years where these athletes have been compensated. At least now it's on the up and open. I tend to think that that's the most socially just thing. Tell me I'm wrong, Tim.
Well, no, I actually think you're right. I think we should just give up the farce that they're students.
Isn't that what we're doing?
Yeah, well, maybe, but you're still like having them go to class, and probably universities are letting them slide and letting them cheat. There's been those scandals. Was it Kansas or North Carolina, or those other places, right?
Fill in the blank. It's happened it's happened at Notre Dame, I'm sure. It's happened at Penn State. It's happened at USC. It's happened at this. It's happened at that.
Right. Well, let's look at this another way, though, John. The university at the forefront of societal evolution, right, talks about oppressor and oppressed. And what do? They fight tooth and nail, letting young, predominantly black men move about freely, i.e. transfer, and get the fruits of their labor. Okay. Right? And that's close to a plantation, and that's what echoed in that article you said.
Yeah, close Taylor Branch you're referring to.
Yeah,
right?
Plantation mentality. And it's just it's an embarrassing joke.
It's, to me though, it's amazing to me. If you and I had this discussion 30 years ago, I would have been on the other side. They're getting compensated. They're getting a college education. That's always been the contention, right? Mm-hmm. But what I have come to realize, and this is, you referred to it earlier, there is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian who teaches at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His name is Taylor Branch. In 2000, for years, he's been arguing that, to your point, this is a plantation mentality. The NCAA illegally operates as a cartel. It's not allowing, it's completely unjust. It's a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, which, by the way, is what the Supreme Court agreed with recently, that these athletes should be able to be paid. And he wrote this famous article, and it was called The Shame of College Athletics. And it was basically criticizing the NCAA for what he calls their cynical hoaxes and legalistic confections regarding amateurism, basically saying they should be able to unionize, they should be able to get benefits. And the example that really struck with me, and tell me if this does with you, if you are a prize-winning pianist, you are given a God-given gift that others do not have, right? Mm-hmm. And you go to fill-in-the-blank university. You could play at Carnegie Hall and be compensated for that without violating any rules. But if you put a basketball or a football in that person's hand, now they're violating rules. To me, that's completely anathema to like fairness, justice, all these sorts of things. And so I today, it's remarkable for me to say this, but I really began to see it when I was at Notre Dame, watching these athletes who were being compensated, whether we wanted to admit it or not. And I don't believe in the Catholic phenomenon, which is if you bury things down deep and don't talk about them, they're not a problem. No, get it out in the open. That's why I believe in legalizing drugs. Drugs by itself, illegal drugs, is one of the 10 biggest industries in the world. It's not because people aren't demanding the product. The same thing applies here. Athletes should be paid. People are watching it. As soon as this podcast is over, Timmy, what am I going to do? I'm going down to watch the games, right? So if you want to criticize people, criticize the fans, because they're the ones who are creating this market. It's just the athletes who are not being compensated.
Well, like I say, I'm okay. I'm okay with them now being compensated. I'm fine with that. I'm just upset with the illusion that student matters. Like for example, the NBA, lets people enter after 1 year of college, right?
Okay.
Right. So how many of those people go to college and actually get a college degree, right? I want to know 5 years from now, how many people who graduated who didn't go on to the next level are using their degree and working with it, right? Like if there's any student in this student athlete thing, we should know this stuff and we should care about it.
Right. Okay. So that leads to my next point, which is, what about the current construct as it is? So you and I, and again, there was a guy who was our classmate, Jason Ching. I don't know if you remember him. I believe he was from Hawaii. He got injured and had like lifelong issues with his leg, I want to say. He was a defensive lineman. He was one of the highest rated recruits in the country. I don't even think he played it down ultimately at Notre Dame. But he was injured like 2 days into practice, first year. And he still has lifelong injuries, 50 years old, right? Yeah. Okay. So why am I bringing that up? Because what would I want from the current system? Because the current system as it exists has to be fixed yet again. I'm okay with the compensation for the athletes. Where I have a problem is guys that are getting 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th years, right? Mm-hmm. People that are transferring from one school to another. They're the number one player on St. John's, at one point, the number one team in the country, has already entered the transfer portal and has put his name in the NBA draft simultaneously. That's fine. Free enterprise. I mean, if you're a 17-year-old computer genius, you can get hired by Intel. You don't have to wait a year, right? So I think to your point, the illusion is gone. I'm okay with that because it's always been there. It's just we're now being on the up and up about it, as Taylor Branch has long said. Just pay these athletes. We're doing it anyway. But again, they shouldn't be able to transfer 7, 8, 9 times, get 9 years of eligibility. And further, I do think that if they're going to go to school, they should at minimum be there 2 years to get an associate's degree. Something that basically says, look, we're done with the illusion that you are a student athlete, but as you're going to be an athlete here, we're at least going to give you the student part too. What say you, Tim?
I mean, I think those are fine things. Part of me wishes there were a way to make, it actually be about being athletics and students and health and well-being and all that stuff. But I guess that ship has sailed. I guess I heard of a model where they basically allow a university to sort of have a minor league or whatever you would call it, a franchise for sporting completely independent of the academics.
Yeah, I've heard of this model as well. I was a president of a university. I believe it was the former president of Indiana University, but don't quote me on that, who has argued that what universities should do to be intellectually consistent is have a school of athletics, meaning that's what they're there for. If they get an education as an addendum, great. The same way that you and I went to Notre Dame or went to whatever school to get an education and we happen to play, rec sports, great, right? Yeah. Education for them is secondary to the athletics part. But again, I think the NCAA is I liken it to the mafia. At least the mafia is honest. President Emmert, and his first name escapes me, he used to be the president of Washington University, and he became the president of the NCAA, was pulling down $5+ million a year in compensation for a quote-unquote amateur organization. Good work if you can get it, wouldn't you say, Tim?
Yeah, well, Deion Sanders, did you see that? I think he got like a $54 million contract to be a coach of a not particularly big-time team in Colorado.
Well, this is one of the rubs that a lot of people have a problem with, which is in something like 48 or 49 of the states, the highest paid state employee is not the governor. It's always the head basketball coach, the head football coach, whatever it may be at some university. But again, my thing was, if guys are pulling down $10, $12 million a year as Dabo Sweeney is at Clemson, it's very difficult for me to then say with a straight face, the guys who actually created that monetary value, meaning the athletes, are not getting a piece of that pie. Right. So I'm fine with that. What I think we need to do is, and this is my proposal, you can transfer once in a 4 or say 5 year period, right? Mm-hmm. You can transfer for your graduate year, which is exactly what a lot of people do. They graduate from X, Y, and Z school after 4 years. They have an additional year. They go get an MBA basically for free and continue to play basketball or football or whatever it may be. Okay by me. In addition, you should be able to transfer once in 4 years. If you want to transfer a second time, you have to sit out a year. That's what I would say. The other thing that I would say is if a coach leaves, because one of the contentions always was these athletes are recruited by Bob Smith at State U. Mm-hmm. Bob Smith gets an offer and it's happening right now. Villanova just hired a basketball coach today. Well, what about the guys at Maryland that he left behind? Shouldn't they be able to leave without penalty? I'm free, or at least comfortable with the notion of examining. If a coach who recruited you leaves, you should be able to leave. Maybe though they restrict it that you can only go to that school. Right. I don't know how they do this and still maintain fairness, but you shouldn't be able to just transfer every other year or every year in many cases. And there should be a limit on your eligibility. It should be 5 years, barring a medical issue. Like someone like Jason Ching, if he was able to come back, he should be able to come back and play 4 years. But aside from that, I'm okay with the name, image, and likeness thing. So,
yeah, the other thing I want to point out is that there are student athletes who take the student part very seriously. Like I was in a lab with, Pat Garrity, right? He played in the NBA for a while, and he was serious about his academics and a smart guy. And so I also feel like those folks are getting...
But that's the anomaly, Tim. You know that, right? I mean, that's the rarity. That's not the rule. That's the exception.
I know, but I want to point out that those people exist, and all power to them.
Oh, of course. But I also am of the belief that if you're playing basketball at Duke or you're playing football at USC, you are in all but name a professional or semi-professional athlete. If you play lacrosse at Bucknell or one of the small schools in Wisconsin or some of these schools that you've never heard of except for the NCAA tournament, and you happen to play field hockey there, that's a college athlete. The people who play, basketball at Louisville are not college athletes. Right. They're professionals or AAA. Baseball might teach us something about this. Yeah. Have different levels, AAA, AA, single A, and so forth, right?
Well, and also, I mean, so let's think about baseball. Baseball, you can enter the draft right out of high school.
Yeah.
For baseball. And then there are people who go to college and play baseball, but often those aren't the most, the highest performing or most serious. I don't know what you would call it. But and those folks tend to, I think, get more degrees than, say the basketball folks. And so I think that's an interesting pathway. Maybe we shouldn't have maybe just the requirement to go to college to enter the NFL or whatever. We should just waive that.
Right. But my thing is I'm okay with waiving it for the, because there's very few guys actually that can go directly from high school to the pros in any sport. It's going to happen more often in basketball simply because of the type of game it is right. And the athletes and so forth. But my thing is if you enroll at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and you want to play sports there and you are in all but name a professional athlete, that's fine. But I think there should be a minimum expectation that at least you're going to leave with an associate's degree. Get 2 years out of it. That doesn't seem to be an unfair ask. If you come...
Right. But I mean, if they're professionals anyways, why even require, the league can say, we want you to grow up and have some time being coached in college. Like, that's fine. But if the league's just said, hey, we'll take you as soon as you're ready, like that gets a lot of this, money and NIL pressure out of the college zone anyways.
Yeah. But my thing is I wouldn't be okay if Notre Dame got rid of football. I wouldn't be okay if Villanova got rid of basketball. I'm the problem because all rational thought goes out my brain. I mean, you should have seen me in that playoff run from December to January with Notre Dame football. Would you be okay if Notre Dame stopped playing football tomorrow?
I think I'd be okay with it.
Would you really?
Yeah. If they said this is in the best interest of our student body and our university, I'd respect that. Because like I said, what is a university? And I don't think a sports franchise is in the top 3.
Right. That's not exactly what they were set up to do, right? No, I got it. Yeah,
I mean Plato's Academy, right? They weren't winning the Olympics, right? They were sitting and learning.
Right, but going back to the Catholic Church, and for some reason I'm having fun with the Catholic Church today. Do you know who the single largest landowner in the world is? The Catholic Church. Yeah, and they don't pay $1 in property taxes. I don't, they happen to be a real estate organization that preaches the good word of God. Could not the same thing be applied to a lot of different things, whether it be the university system or otherwise. But again, I also think that we're overstating how dramatic this issue is, because I think there's, pick what number you would, I'm going to arbitrarily say 60. There's 60 universities, 60 programs, if you will, maybe 100 programs that are the serious issue. There are thousands of universities. So if you're playing, you're a swimmer at, Truman State University or whatever it may be, you're there just like Pat Garrity was. It just so happened that he went to a big time school, but you're there for the athletics and the academics. I get that. But maybe we're overstating it. And really, this is another proposal that's been put forth that I can't say I don't agree with, or that I disagree with, I should say, which is maybe they should have a AAA. Duke basketball, North Carolina basketball, UCLA basketball, they're AAA, right? Everybody else is pro, then there's the NBA and the NFL and so forth. But again, as soon as this podcast is over, going to watch the game. So I'm the hypocrite. So, well, Timmy.
Should I share my whack job?
Yeah, let's share the whack job.
Where do you think my whack job is from, John? I'll give you one. It
has to be, it's either, the week you've had, it's either DC or the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
It's the University.
Which of those two?
University of Wisconsin-Madison, John.
Please tell me it's elected official from there.
Close.
Okay.
This is a wonderful name. It's Julie Laundrie, the public records custodian for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So according to Guilford, who's the head of the Office of Compliance, let me just read this. Wisconsin has some of the most robust open records law in the nation, and we are committed to meeting those requirements with each request we receive. And as a state institution, UW-Madison is subject to the public records law. Well, why do I bring this up? Well, in a January 18th article, the University of Wisconsin is refusing to disclose even redacted versions of their NIL contracts because it would jeopardize the competitive position of the university and ultimately detrimental to the public interest. So knowing what's going on at a public institution paid by our public dollars is somehow against the public interest. They go on.
Timmy, have you ever seen the movie Liar, Liar?
Yeah.
Jim Carrey. He says, "Objection, Your Honor." He says, "On what grounds?" He goes, "Because it's devastating to my case." And he says, "Overruled." I just wish there was an addendum that people could file. We're all for open records, except when we're not, when it's going to really embarrass us.
Well, check this. It gets better, John.
All right, I'm ready.
They say that disclosure would create an especially stark disadvantage for the UW, which has to compete with private institutions subject to less stringent open records requirements. So the translation is, Wisconsin law puts us at a disadvantage, so we're ignoring the law.
Right, exactly. I mean, this is the Jim Carrey. It's devastating to us.
Yeah.
Right?
It's shameless double talk. And Julie Laundrie, I'm sorry, you're unable to launder the stain on the UW-Madison Badgers in this process. My whack job of the week.
So I used to tell my students a story about, states like, for instance, in Florida, they have the sunshine law. Yeah. The basic premise is the best disinfectant is sunshine.
Sunlight.
Is light, right? So the way in which you avoid corruption is you make it available publicly. And I'm a big advocate of FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. Well, a lot of people don't realize this, but one of my favorite guys, President Obama, became President Obama and didn't remain State Senator Obama because of the open records laws. Are you familiar with what I'm referring to in 2004, Tim?
No.
Okay. So he was running against, at the time, he was a state senator, and he was running against a very well-heeled, very wealthy Republican by the name of Jack Ryan. Talk about a central casting, right? That's a Tom Clancy character, Jack Ryan.
Not Dan Ryan, because I just went to Chicago. No.
So well done though. Anyhow, so Jack Ryan was very, very well, compensated. He had a good campaign. The polling was showing it was neck and neck. It was very likely, if not, obvious that he could win this thing, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they have this thing called opposition research, which is affectionately also known as dirt. Let's find out what we can about this guy as soon as we can. So Illinois has open records law, and it turns out that divorce and marriage certificates and such are part of the open records law.
Yeah.
Well, Jack Ryan was married to the actress Jerry Ryan, who was on Star Trek or Star Trek: The Next Generation, one of those famous shows.
Seven of Nine on Voyager.
There you go. Okay. Anyhow, it turns out that Jack Ryan was into some real kinky stuff. And that was all laid out in great detail in their divorce records. The Obama campaign, to their credit, found it and basically said, hey, guys, now, does that mean that Jack Ryan would not have been a fabulously, gifted senator, a great orator? Who knows? We'll never know. The point being is the Republicans came to Jack Ryan and said, is this true? He says, no, it's absolutely not true. It's not true. It's not true. Within a week, he had dropped out of the race. Obama was then able to run against a guy named Alan Keyes, who he summarily destroyed, something like 95-5. Right?
Who's a very smart guy, but has
very smart.
The charisma of a postage stamp.
Right. He's a very smart guy, but he had no chance. Plus, they waited to release this information. If memory serves, this is 20 plus years ago. They waited to release this information until after the deadline for finding a new candidate had passed. So there was all sorts of restrictions on who they could get, blah, blah, blah. So Obama became then Senator-elect Obama, and then 4 years later became President Obama. Yeah. So, FOIA is one of these things that can work both ways, as it were. But I always tell people, if you want a salacious example of, the Sunshine Law, the Freedom of Information Act at work, there you go.
Yeah.
So now, Timmy, have you ever, my hero of the week, have you ever really sort of, there's that famous expression, it's an old adage for a reason. Don't judge a book by its cover, right?
Yep.
Okay. There are, I would say, and tell me, germane to our discussion, there are 4 or 5 teams in sports that universally, if you do not root for them, you hate them. There's no gray area. I would say Notre Dame's one of them, Notre Dame football, right? Mm-hmm. Duke basketball, the Dallas Cowboys.
Yep.
And is there anybody else that I'm leaving out?
Maybe the Patriots.
Patriots. Okay.
Maybe not anymore. But now you just feel sorry for them.
Then there's the Lakers, right? There's the Lakers, the Celtics, and so forth. But, there's no gray area with these teams, right? You loathe them. Well, as a diehard Giants fan who, loves them to death, I take great pleasure in what that German term called Schadenfreude, which is enjoying the misery of others. There is nothing more rewarding to me than every January watching Jerry Jones's face, because it's been 30 years since they've been in an NFC championship game, watching his team struggle and his colossal ego just take another hit, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, I'm watching this show, and if you haven't seen it, it's on Paramount. It's called Landman, Landman, which is a term. It's basically oil speculation. It is the story. It is Billy Bob Thornton. He stars in it. John Hamm's in it. Demi Moore's in it. It's on Paramount. It is excellent. I'm going to try and tell you about the story without telling too much, but Jerry Jones actually is now my hero. I cannot believe I'm saying this, and I'm actually this week going to write him a note just telling him how touching his scene was. He has a cameo in Landman. John Hamm is an oil speculator. He has a heart attack, and Jerry Jones goes to talk to him and tells him about the importance of family in his life and focus on what's important. Apparently, it turns out it was completely autobiographical. I don't want to ruin it, but you should watch this scene. And if your opinion on Jerry Jones doesn't change 180 degrees like mine did, I don't know if you have a soul. It was literally one of the best scenes. He was nearly crying in this. You could tell it was sincere, right? Like you couldn't fake this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to write him a note and say, I cannot believe this. I will never root for the Dallas Cowboys, even in spite of that, but I will root for you. Aww. I have never, ever had this touching of an experience. I mean, I've had it a handful of times where you see something, but I had judged this book by its cover. And then it turns out this guy is pretty deep. Oh my goodness, you got to see this show and you got to see this cameo. I was asking people after I saw it, I said, did you see Landman? Did you see Jerry Jones? And everybody to a man goes, oh my God, right? I said, yeah, I couldn't believe it. So Jerry Jones is my hero of the week.
That's cool.
Yeah.
We'll save this for the best of episode.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if we can get Jerry Jones on the podcast.
Yeah. We'll work on it.
Yeah. Well, nothing helps, a billionaire than stroking their ego. So if I tell him how great his cameo was, and I'm being sincere, it was fabulous. The last time I felt like this, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Jeffrey Dahmer's parents, I saw them in an interview years after he was killed. Yeah. Unbelievably impressive people. And they basically said, we don't know where my son came from. I love him. I do not love what he did. Yeah. And it was difficult to watch a parent's love, but it's, undying. But this thing with Jerry Jones, and people who have seen it agree with me. Timmy, watch the show and then watch that cameo. It's episode 9, and tell me you don't change your opinion on Jerry Jones. Still won't root for the Cowboys, but I won't necessarily root against him anymore. How about that?
Sounds good.
Excellent. Well, Timmy, enjoy the NCAA tournament. We're contributing to NIL, as it were. I'm going to go watch it now, and everybody have a great week. And this is John Bolin signing off saying, hey, misbehave, drive fast, take chances.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And everybody, don't forget to share, like, subscribe, review. Don't keep this podcast a secret. If everybody likes what you're doing out there, you're probably not doing anything worthwhile. Take care out there.